Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's epic video, which features the second Marshall amp this month. Okay, the response was so overwhelming to that first Marshall amp video that I went out and beat the bushes and turned up another one that I think may even be nicer than that first one. This is a Marshall 1968 model JMP-50 50-watt bass amplifier. And when I say bass, I mean this is the 1986 circuit, not the 1987 circuit that we saw in the previous video. If you thought the previous amp was rare as hen's teeth, I can't imagine how few of these bass amps there are. And don't worry, just because they call it a bass amp doesn't mean it is a bass amp. Remember that Fender called the Bassman a Bassman, okay? And look what it turned out being good for. I think you'll find that the same is true with this model. I also think you're going to find that the condition of this is astounding and absolutely original, except for a few updates, like with electrolytic capacitors, that are pretty much inescapable if you want an amp that you can use. Okay, but other than that, this one is just what we say about cars, it's stock as a stone. Okay, I think you're just going to be thrilled when you see it inside and out. I've been studying up on my Marshall book and learning some history and some details, and what I intend to do is first take you on a tour inside and out of this really nice old amp. Then we'll do a circuit comparison between the 1986 and 1987 circuit versions. Okay, now to you all that aren't used to Marshall amps, when I say 1986 or 1987, that's not the year. That's just like with Fender when they say a 5E1 circuit. Okay, that's the circuit number. So we'll see that the two circuits are very similar, but there are some differences that theoretically make this more suitable for bass. But then at the end, we're going to have a side-by-side comparison of the 1987 version from the first video and this 1986 circuit, and see what you think. Okay, if the tone is different, you know, and you can draw your own conclusions. Okay, so if that sounds exciting, then let's get started. We'll start taking this apart in just a few minutes and take a look, a thorough look inside and out. We'll go into detail on the plexiglass control panel and rear panel once I get the chassis out of the cabinet. But for now, let's just look at the Tolex and handle. On top, we see that the Tolex is in remarkably good condition. I've been told that this is most likely a reproduction Marshall emblem here. I don't really know one way or the other about that, but I'm sure you experts will be jumping out of your chair right now saying, yes, that's a reproduction. Okay, and that's what I was told. The rest of it, though, I don't think is reproduction. Let me turn it around real quick. We'll take a look at the rear exterior, and then we'll start taking this apart and getting a really close-up look. As you can see, the rear is just as nice as the front and top. So let's get to work here, removing these Phillips head screws, get the back off, and start taking a look at all the details and the circuit itself. Talk about two lazy kitties. I guess they're getting along pretty well because they're both sleeping here, taking their cat nap on the same bed at the same time. You shameless pussycats. I've removed the chassis from the cabinet, and that's going to give us a great opportunity for a close-up view of all the details. Let's start off with this nearly flawless, there's a little chip out of the corner, plexiglass control panel plate. JMP, this is not that black flag version because this is from 1968. Notice the really odd little toggle ends, okay? They're not spread out like beaver tails. They're little points. I believe that's original neon pilot light. And we have our presence, bass, middle, treble, and then volume 1 and volume 2 with original knobs that are in really nice condition. And then inputs for channel 1 and channel 2. On top is the assembly tag signed by ST. Look at this, we got Renee and Ruth, and down here what, BAH. So there's no doubt that a lady was involved, at least with the AC part of the construction of this circuit. And looking at the top of the chassis, we see the original Drake, this power transformer with the part numbers, big stout output transformer, and filter choke. Now let's turn it around and take a look at the tubes. Okay, I removed the tube shields and the first preamp tube. Can't get much better than a made in Holland Amperex. Okay, now let's take a look at the number 2 tube. An original RCA. And the third, this will be for our phase inverter, and it is a Mullard. Well, you couldn't ask for 3 better 12AX7s than that. Okay, now here's kind of what's unusual, and that is that the output tubes, which are EL34s, the first one is a Sylvania, and the second is an RCA. So you're thinking, oh my God, 2 different brands. They can't be very well matched. But when you compare the internal structures of these 2 tubes, they're absolutely identical in every way. And I think that RCA made both tubes. Okay, we'll see when we bias this circuit how these things match, but I can see now why the owner was willing to use what appear to be 2 different brands of tubes, because I think internally they are identical. Now, as far as the electrolytics, this is an F&T, which is probably a replacement, since I believe F&Ts are of more recent manufacture. The taller one here is something called an ARS. I'm not familiar with that. It may be of European origin, and so I have not encountered this brand before, but I feel fairly confident that the electrolytic capacitors have been changed, which to me is a good thing. Okay, now let's take a look at the rear plexi panel. Now let's make a pass down the flawless rear plexiglass panel here on the rear of the chassis and stop, and lo and behold, the original Bolgan 3-prong receptacle with the matching power cord. Okay, completely original. Then we move to the left, we see the usual 2 amp fuse for the primary AC, and normally it's a 1/2 amp fuse for the high voltage, but in this case it's been increased to 1 amp. Now, I'm not sure why. I can ask the owner about that. Generally it's a bad idea to increase amp ratings. There may be a good reason for it. Then we have those very unusual little plug-in selector jumpers, and I've got this one set at 8 ohms and 120 volts, and of course the speaker outlet. Then we come down to the Made in England with the serial number that is about 400 counts later than the amp in the first video. Okay, and that's why, since this is a 68, it's assumed that the amp in the previous video, the Marshall amp, was a late 67. Okay, because it was like a 104 or something like that. So as you can see then, the numbers are very close to each other, surprisingly enough. Okay, so there is a genuine plexiglass, where Plexi got its name, control panel plate. I removed the rear panel. We can check it out, both sides. It has that fragile plastic tag still intact. Flip it over and see what the other side looks like. See some darkening up here, probably from heat over time from the output tubes. But a little bit of loose Tolex right here, but otherwise really nice shape. Well, the interior of the cabinet is surprisingly clean. Don't see any evidence of rodent infestation, which is a surprise nowadays. It looks like when they're painting the black floor, they stopped short so they wouldn't get paint on this metal sheet here that serves as a shield for the circuit from electromagnetic and radio frequency interference. All in all, a good, stout, solid cabinet. I've got the chassis flipped over here so that we can see the circuitry. Let me make a slow pass so that you can take it all in. Then we'll go back over it in detail and compare the 1986 and 1987 circuits on schematics, and then see the actual components here in the 1986 chassis. Alright, first impressions are that all of those mustard capacitors are still in place in this amp, which is a good thing. I know that Marshall enthusiasts really hold these capacitors in high esteem. Several things I saw in this circuit are not exactly the same as the schematic, and let me show you right now. In the schematic there is no depth cap. However, a Hunt's capacitor here is in the depth cap position and still intact. The schematic for the 1986 version does not show screen resistors, but here are two of them. They look like period resistors. They appear to have been installed a long time ago, and they make really good sense. So I tend to think that these are legit and original, and that they just didn't show up in the schematic. Under here we can see some fresh soldering where the electrolytic capacitors were changed, I believe. We'll come around here, and you see that all of the sealant is in place on every nut and bolt, showing that none of the transformers have been changed or any of the tube sockets. That much is completely original. These two Mallory capacitors caught my attention. They're 10s, whereas on the schematic it says 8s. Now these may have been replaced, but they don't look like it to me. I know Marshall experts can probably chime in and tell us if they use Mallory capacitors in this position. It's my understanding that when they were building these amps, they used pretty much whatever components they had on hand, and maybe these were handy. They're excellent capacitors, and they're still in really good working condition, but they do differ a bit from the schematic. This over here, though, I have no doubt it's an F&T, a German-made electrolytic capacitor, very high quality, but no doubt this is a new replacement, and it's at 33 microfarads, and I believe the original was supposed to be 50-50, but that has definitely been changed. Other than that, though, I'm at a loss to find anything else about this that does not look completely original. As I said, I'm not an expert on Marshall amps, but I have worked on amplifiers for a long time, and I can kind of spot when they've been changed. And this one does not seem to have had hardly any alterations, other than for sure in this position. Now let us begin our comparison of the two circuits. If this doesn't interest you, then by all means skip ahead to where we pick up with something that does interest you. For those of you who want to be able to equate schematics to circuits, however, even if you don't care particularly about Marshall amplifiers, this will be an excellent way for you to learn how to turn what you see on a schematic into what you see in a circuit. All right, let's get started. Over here, of course, is the 1986 schematic, and on the right side will be the 1987. First thing, we look at the first preamp tube, which is going to be a 12AX7. On the 1986 schematic, they show it as one tube, whereas they split the two triodes apart on the 1987 schematic. That is not a difference. Okay, it's just a different way of drawing the 12AX7. So this much and this much are equivalent. But the difference is how they bypass and bias the cathodes in the two tubes. In the 1987 model, you have an 820 ohm bias resistor and a 320 microfarad bypass cap on one triode, and a 2.7K bias resistor and a 0.68 microfarad bypass cap on the second triode. In the 1986 version, however, both cathodes are connected and biased and bypassed together. 320 microfarad bypass cap, 820 ohm bias resistor. Now let's look in the circuit. Here's our 320 microfarad bypass cap and our 820 ohm bias resistor, and you notice that the cathode up here connected by the yellow wire jumpers so that the two cathodes are biased and bypassed as one. Okay, they're done together. Next, as we move from left to right, we see that there is a 0.005 microfarad capacitor which allows the high frequencies to bypass the volume control on the second input. Whereas on the 1986 version, there is no such bypass capacitor. We look over here, and if it were present, I'm assuming it would be in this position, probably from here to here, and it is not present. This is correct for the 1986, and if it were 1987 version, there would be a capacitor jumpering probably from this lead to this lead. Now let's look at the second preamp tube, and we'll look for differences. The first triode has a cathode bypass cap of 0.68 microfarads in the 1987 version. And if you look over here, there are no bypass caps at all on the second preamp tube. We've got 820 ohms for the first triode and 100K for the second triode bias resistors. We look in here and we can see them side by side. 820 and 100K. These are the bias resistors for V2, right here, the second preamp tube. Next we'll get to the tone stack, and there are two major differences between the tone stack of the 1986 and the 1987 versions. First off is up here in the treble position, 250 picofarad capacitor in the 86 and a 500 picofarad cap in the 1987. Also, the so-called slope resistor for the 1987 is a 33K, whereas for the 86 it's a 56K. So we'll come over here to the circuit, and we see the 56K slope resistor and the 250 picofarad treble capacitor, which is appropriate for the 1986 version. The long-tailed pair phase inverter and the presence control are the same in both circuits. But there's a major difference in the coupling caps for the output tubes. In the 87 version, you see they are 0.022 microfarads, whereas in the 86 version, they're both 0.1. We look in here and we see that these are the two 0.1 microfarad coupling caps for our two output tubes. Something else I thought that was unusual is in the 1986 version they show a 25K pot and a 47K fixed resistor here in the negative DC bias supply by which we bias the two grids of the output tubes. Okay, but when I look in here at the circuit itself, there is no adjustable pot, and I don't think there ever was one. Okay, instead there's a fixed 68K resistor, okay, which is in the ballpark definitely when you add 25 and 47, that the 68K fixed resistor is in the right range here for the biasing. Now when I bias the output tubes, we'll see if this is correct, if this is accurate. If not, I'll have to change it. But there's no doubt that the schematic shows an adjustable bias, whereas in reality, adjustable bias does not exist in this particular circuit. One final comment is that in the previous Marshall video, which was also a model 1987, it was tube rectified. It had a GZ34. Much was said by some viewers that, oh, well, it must have been converted, okay, because all of these are diode rectified. But one undeniable fact argues quite convincingly, at least to me, that Jim Marshall built that previous model 1987 with a GZ34 rectifier. Here's why. If you're going to have a tube rectifier, you have to have a 5-volt winding on your power transformer. There was no evidence in that circuit that that power transformer had ever been changed, and it did have a 5-volt winding. The only explanation for the presence of that 5-volt winding is that from the get-go, that circuit was designed to use a GZ34 rectifier. This particular circuit that we're looking at today was planned for diode rectification, and therefore there is no 5-volt winding on the power transformer. With that said, let's take one last loving look here at the circuit of this very, very uncommon and extraordinarily original Marshall amplifier. Okay, now it's time to check the tube bias, and then I think it will be time to do some sound comparisons between the 1986 circuit and the 1987 circuit. Keeping in mind that this 1986 model was theoretically a bass amp, while the 1987 model was a guitar amp. But as we've seen, even with the Fender Bassman, which in theory was a bass amp but ended up being one of the premier guitar amps of all time, sometimes the original intention for the amp doesn't end up being the best purpose for the amp. So we'll get a great chance here to compare the Marshall Bass 1986 to a Marshall Guitar 1987, both 50-watt plexi amps. All right, here are the bias readings, and I didn't expect a very good match because, as we noted before, the two tubes are of different brand. Okay, but the owner told me that when the amplifier was previously biased, that they used, they had an assortment of different tubes, and they used the two that were best matched. And by coincidence, they were not from the same manufacturer. And my readings will verify that assertion. If you look here, the primary resistance of the primary winding of the output transformer, voltage drop is very close. Plate voltage measured between the plate and ground is 405 volts DC. Look at the plate current, beautifully matched. Plate dissipation is comfortably below the maximum, or which is what, 70% of 25 watts. And I see no reason to change any of this, and I'm very pleasantly surprised at how well matched these tubes are. Instead of at 70%, they're matched at around 60% of maximum plate dissipation. So it does appear that that fixed 68K resistor in lieu of the adjustable bias pot was the proper value for this circuit. And it does appear, as previously described, that the two EL84s, although being marked Sylvania and RCA, were actually made by the same company and are internally identical, probably both made by RCA. Before we button this up, a couple more observations. I love the way they laced together this bundle of wires. It reminds me of a high watt here, where it comes, makes a right angle, bundled neatly. And also for those, the death cap police out there, yes, I disconnected the death cap, insulated the tip, but I left that Hunt's capacitor in place. If somebody in the future wants to reconnect it, they can, but at least the amp is structurally complete. As we're concluding our circuit review and examination of the model 1986 Marshall amp, we need to cover a couple points before we take it inside and do the audio comparison with the model 1987. The first important point is that the two inputs for the Marshall model 1986 are different. One is normal for bass guitar. The other is designated high treble, which would be for a regular guitar. Now let's see how they're handled and why they have these different designations. First off, the normal input will come here into the left-hand triode of the 12AX7, come up out of the plate, through the coupling cap, down here to a 1 meg volume control, and then through a 470K resistor and into the first triode of the second preamp 12AX7. But the signal that is fed into the high treble input is handled a little differently. It comes up here to the grid of the right-hand triode of the 12AX7, whereas the normal signal went into the left-hand grid. It exits from the plate here and comes up and through the same exact value of coupling capacitor as the normal signal. It travels down here to exactly the same value of volume control as the normal signal. But at this point, things change. The normal signal has to pass through a 470K ohm resistor to get to the grid of the second preamp tube. The high frequencies that are presented down here in the high treble input signal, however, can bypass the 470K ohm resistor and take a shortcut into the grid of the second preamp tube. They can pass through this 500 picofarad capacitor. Okay, so they are not attenuated then by the 470K ohm resistor. I think it's worth noting that the idea of having a bright input and a normal input in a bass amp was also seen in the Fender Bassman Model 5 F6A, upon which the Marshall amp is based. In the Fender case, the bright input is bright because there is a 0.0001 microfarad cap that allows the high frequencies to take a shortcut around the volume control. Number two, I want to correct something I said earlier that was in error. I said that the pilot light was a neon bulb. It is not. It is a 6.3 volt incandescent bulb wired in parallel in the 6.3 volt filament wiring supply. And finally, I wanted to remind you that this 1986 bass amp is diode rectified, while the 1987 lead amp that it will be compared to has a GZ34 tube rectifier. Now let's take a quick break to open a couple surprise packages from generous viewers, and then we'll go inside and have what I hope is a very satisfying and entertaining comparison between the model 1986 bass amp and its older brother, the model 1987 lead. Well, it looks like Jack is performing his ritual CAT scan on this very nice present here from Joe V, a viewer, and it is a Eurotubes bias probe. Now, the way it works, for those of you not familiar, is you plug this in where your output tube would go into the amp. Then you plug the output tube into this female socket, and this one will give you a direct reading on plate current and plate voltage. Okay, now I will do an evaluation of this, and I'll also do it the manual way, and we'll have a comparison in a future video. Okay, if that sounds interesting, then stay tuned. And now for our second gift, it looks like Patrick Devine in Washington State sent us about a 25-pound box of crinkle cut French fries. Let's open it up and see what's really inside. Well, the first item here is a whole bag full of those metal-bodied Sprague vitamin C capacitors. Good Lord, talk about high-quality caps. Okay, now let's see what's in the rest of the box. And lo and behold, the box contains about a 20-pound EdCore power transformer. Here are the specs on it. I can tell you that no matter what circuit you're building, I think this could provide adequate voltage and current to just about anything. And the paint job, this is almost too pretty to close up in a cabinet. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Between the capacitors and this, I'm overwhelmed. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Well, fans, I hope you have your popcorn and you're ready for the amp extravaganza. We've got I got back that 1987 model Marshall JMP lead amp, and we're going to do a direct side-by-side comparison with the model 1986 bass amp. And to give us a good Gibson twang here on the guitar front, we've got a 1958 Les Paul Jr. that somebody put a little tailpiece on, but it's been put back to all original specs with the original P9. And then to make sure that we had things properly covered on the speaker front, we've got a 1972 Marshall extension cabinet with two 12s. They are original vintage 30s, straight from old Jim Marshall himself. Okay, so I think we've got a really nice combo setup here, and let's get started. Okay, to start off the festivities, we have the late 1967 model 1987, I know that's confusing, Marshall 50-watt lead amp. It's a JMP model. This is the one that was featured in the video posted back at the 1st of April. Now, the way I picture this is we're going to play a tune on the 1987 model here, then we'll play the same tune on the 1986 model so you can make a direct comparison. And now, in response to viewer demands, we've jumpered the input channels 1 and 2. Let's play a tune and see how that sounds. Well, I guess that about does it for this video featuring the 1968 Marshall JMP model 1986 bass amp. I hope you appreciated the detailed circuit analysis and then the comparison between it and its twin brother, the model 1987 lead amp. As usual, I want to send my thanks out to all my Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors who keep us on the air and advertising free. If any of you would like to join them, I'll include some links in the video description to enable you to do so. Also, if you'd like to contribute any old unused tube equipment or components, I'm always happy to receive them. And now, without further ado, let's go get some fresh air at the big car show at the War Eagles Air Museum. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out this jewel. Looks like a handmade grill shell. Very nicely done, actually. Kind of unusual. I sort of prefer the original, but my God, a lot of work. Like the pinstriping, wheel choice, beautiful. Unchopped top. I'm not going to say it. Say it for me. Beautiful interior. Oh yeah, darn it. Couldn't keep it. Uh-oh. The minute you put a name on a car, I drop it like 5 points. It's like the old days where they'd name them after their girlfriends and all. It was bad then and it's worse now. I'm not real thrilled with the 59 Cadillac taillight, so I guess he doesn't much care what I think, because he'd never asked my advice. Very nice though. A lot of original touches. Here's that Studebaker we saw pulling in. God, I love that. I love the colors, the kind of a pearlescent with violet lettering. Beautiful. Look at this. I'm assuming the taillights are built behind that red plastic shield or lens. Nice interior of the bed here. Like a little toolbox. Not very fancy wheels. Got some pinstriping. Pretty original looking interior, other than the gauges are first class. All in all, very basic, but very nice. Super nice Studebaker. It's one I wouldn't mind owning. I just love the real rounded look. Somebody going for a little spin here around the landing field. This probably isn't healthy. Cars just keep on coming. Mustang, late 40s, early 50s Chevy, truck. Nice and straight. Very understated. Nice Chevelle. This is going to be quite the car show, I'm telling you. People are coming in from several states. There's the old Cobra replica. And this crazy guy out here still driving around out on the runway. Couldn't get much lower to the ground. This is like being at the drag races back in the 50s. Cars driving all around in circles. It's like he's finally decided to park. 44's being standoffish. Like an old, what's that, 52, 53 Chevy back there? Well, if you like sedans, check this thing out. Good grief. 4-door sedan. About the bottom of the list for anybody's basis to build a custom. But it's absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. Great looking interior. As you know, I'm not thrilled with spoke wheels, but they look pretty nice on this. Overall, gorgeous. Oh, here comes that old Chevy. Sounding pretty healthy. Well, sort of healthy. So we go from the like 33 or 34 Ford Victoria over to a little more modern Ford sedan, 39 or 40. The tasteful flames on the window. Not really to my taste, but there they are. Nice understated, simple interior. Got the traditional white walls with the beauty rings and baby moons.
Mr. Dickey! Hey, Sonny!
Very nice.
How you been?
Very, very nice. Wow, it's a big day for Victoria sedans. This is a 2-door. 34. Oh. And if you have any doubts, just look at the seats. Nice color, though. It's kind of a pale violet interior. Be cool in the summer. At least you'd think so. No louvers on the hood. Nice wheels. Beautiful front end and grille. Just a classic. Beautiful 34. Here's the interior of that gray 53 Chevy that we were watching ride around out there.
That's an unusual interior, isn't it?
No kidding.
Well,
look at these seats.
Is that yours?
Yes, sir.
He built the seats.
Here. Hey, Steve. How's it going?
Couldn't get bomber seats, so he made them.
That's cool.
Like
American ingenuity. Very nice.
Exactly.
Yeah. Look at that.
Hey,
Neat
Steve,
old,
how you doing?
still
Good,
chrome
good.
wheels, still painted,
Next week.
reversed wheels, steel
See how I'm
wheels.
doing. I don't like what's happening. I think I'm losing more.
Very nice. Here's a 40 Ford in just basic primer, steel wheels, beauty rings and baby moons. It's shaved, no door handles. Nice interior, but nothing real dramatic. Probably very comfortable. Hood's closed, unfortunately. Maybe you'll open it later. But look at this. I don't see stuff like that every day on the road. And here comes a super nice, unusually painted 39 or 44. Here's the engine on that 53 Chevy, the gray one. Beautiful. Just beautifully done. You'd never really expect this under the hood of this car. We used to do that. We'd polish the tops of our brass radiators. Super nice.